Melissa, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. We are so thankful to have you on today.
Thank you. It's so good to see you again after so long, and I'm glad to be here with you.
So, can you just begin by telling us a little bit about yourself? Who is Melissa?
Yeah, well, my husband and I have lived and worked in the Middle East for about 26 years now, primarily in the Gulf region in Kuwait and Qatar. Um, my husband teaches at the university, and I worked in HR and large scale operations here in the Middle East for a long time with my business background. We raised three amazing boys. They're all adults now, in two of them in college, one of them in the U.S. Navy, and we are just out here serving the Lord and loving God and just enjoying really what the path that He has laid out for us. So it's super cool. We love it.
Awesome. And I got to meet you, just so all of our listeners know. I had the pleasure of meeting you at our church in Doha and got to know you there and loved hearing about your ministry called walkwithme.global. And
Yeah.
I would just love for you to tell us a little bit about that.
Well, walkwithme.global was really born like at the height of the refugee crisis in this region back in 2013, 2014. We had a lot of Syrian and Iraqi refugees that were fleeing. And I was actually consulting in a high profile education event in the United Arab Emirates. And I really felt compelled by the Lord to get involved with this refugee work. It was really out of the blue for me, nothing that I knew. I don't know nonprofit. And then I just ended up asking one of the ladies that worked for the UN, one of the heads actually, how I could get involved in helping refugees and what that might look like. And so shortly after that, I had an invitation from the United Nations to their largest refugee camp in the world, which was nearly 1 million refugees at the time. So I took off in 2014 to just go on a learning curve to figure out how it works, what it looks like, how we might have an impact. And while I was there in Jordan, we met with a number of top ministers in the government there to ask what the major needs were. And one of the things that shocked me, I didn't know this. I figured, there are always groups and UN and other people out there that are helping refugees. But what I learned from the government there is that only 5% of all the funds that come in to support refugees go to help with healthcare and education. And that's where they were asking for help. So I was like,
Wow.
okay, that's going to be where we're going to work. And that's kind of how we started. I came back and thought we would launch right in because I was so excited about it. But it literally took almost a year. And I tried almost everything. I tried to mobilize through my for profit business. Nothing really worked out for that. I put my resume out into almost every nonprofit you can imagine that we're working with, refugees at the time. And we've been in the region a long time. We speak Arabic. So we thought surely something would open up. And I really didn't even get one call back. So I don't know what you saw on the news in the US, but in the fall of 2014, there was fall of 2014. There was a young refugee boy that washed up on shore in Greece. And I don't know if you saw that in the US, but he was like 2 or 3. And his parents were literally fleeing an ISIS attack. And their boat that was designed for 8, but carrying 15 capsized in the
Mhm.
Mediterranean Sea. And he lost his life. And that was my I have to act moment because I was standing in my living room when I saw that. And I just thought, okay, God, this is it. This is where I need to act. And so I called a friend, Dr. Bridget. She wasn't really a friend. I'd met her once for lunch. She was brand new in the country. She was teaching at the nursing school here. She's a PhD nurse. And I said, listen, Dr. Bridget, I would really love to do something to help refugees. I have $2,500 and I want to go to Jordan. And she, at the time, just started weeping. She's like, my dad's dying wish was that I would help refugees. Because I didn't know this about her. I didn't even know her dad had passed
Right.
away. So she said, I'm going to match your 2,500 and let's go. So we literally took off on a flight. And okay, over the course of the year prior, I had built the whole 5-year strategy for what we wanted to do because I am a business person.
You're a
So it wasn't
businesswoman,
just,
right?
yeah. But in the end, we ended up in Jordan. It was just like amazing doors opened. We launched a medical clinic in 4 days, which is absolutely, you can't do that anywhere in the world, let alone the Middle East. And it was just
Wow.
incredible the way that God opened all of those doors and gave us the licensing, and the doctors and nurses were all refugees themselves. So super cool start. But then I was like, oh my, what have I done? I just started $1 million project with $5,000 and no nonprofit and, nothing to back it. So it was a crazy start, but I would never,
Yeah.
not do it again.
So I want to go back to this piece. Like I'm picturing Melissa and Dr. Bridget showing up in Jordan. Like you don't
Yeah.
live in Jordan. So you don't
No,
have these relationships. You're not in a church there that has all
no.
these connections. I mean, you've been there. You went once,
Yeah.
right? So you've been there.
Yeah.
And I'm picturing you like showing up. Who are you connecting with? How in the
Yeah.
world did a medical facility open in
Yeah.
4 days?
We were just as shocked as anyone. But to be honest, we knew a couple of people because our church here in Qatar, the youth group used to go and do short-term mission trips to Jordan and help out with some of the projects around Jordan. And so we knew
Yeah.
a few people from that. We never went on any of those, but some of our friends led him. So we had a couple of contacts like that. And I just started reaching out through my LinkedIn network to some of the medical clinics who were working there. So we knew of one German clinic that was working with refugees in the city. We said, hey, can we visit you to try to figure out how you do it and what you do? And when we got there, we got completely slammed with so many refugees in need that we had to wait like 2 hours. So in the waiting room, we're talking to all the refugees. We're like, "Hey, who are you? And how long have you been here?" And it ended up we met doctors and nurses and pharmacists in that time, in that first 2 hours. And then the
Wow.
partners that we knew through our church, they were like, Melissa, you should know this. We've had a licensed medical building for 5 years. We've been waiting for someone to come and launch a medical clinic. I'm like, no, I didn't know anything about that. So it was just like in day one, everything lined up. And then we were just like, let's go to IKEA and fit it out and let's help people. And I think
Wow.
the thing that was the coolest thing is that, you know, we didn't risk a lot. We risked $5,000, but we thought we'll treat hundreds of refugees with that $5,000. And even if we fail in a launch of a clinic or something like that, we are really failing forward in a way that we're helping so many people. So it was a risk that that was worth the taking.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of jump from the beginning now, and I want you to just kind of before we start talking about these stories about how God has just shown up, I want you to fast forward now. So that was like 2014, you're like
Yeah.
headed to Jordan, you're in
Yeah.
Jordan, you start this. I mean, nothing less than a miracle about God just showing up and starting this for you. And slowly you've built this ministry. I should say God has built this ministry and you're
Yes.
just his
Yeah.
laborer. But
Yeah.
what does it look like now? So tell us what this Walk With Me Global looks like now.
So we did a soft launch of that first clinic in early 2015. So that was the very
Okay.
beginning. I had a 5-year plan that saw us in 2 countries, within 5 years working with refugees. And fast forward that, I mean, just incredible. In the first 2 years, we were already working in 4 countries. And now we have 14 countries and more than 40 projects running. We have 5 medical clinics, we have 3 dental clinics, we have education programs, vocational training programs of every kind that you can imagine. I mean, it's just so cool the doors that God has opened up. And it's really just because we step out in faith and try to figure it out as we go. So
Yeah.
it's super
Wow.
cool.
What can you name a few of the countries that you guys are in? I'm sure you can't name all of them probably,
Yeah.
but can you just a
No,
few
but our
names?
our big ones are all the war-torn areas. Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Jordan, of course, is all the Iraqi and Syrian refugees and a few Yemenis now, and a lot of them. Jordan has so many refugees. But we also have worked with Afghan refugees. We have done a lot, well, a little bit this year with Myanmar refugees. And our major focus for this year has been Ukraine because it has been big and
Yeah.
hard hit. So we're right in the middle of Ukraine right now. So
Wow.
those are some of the countries that we're working in. We have a few outliers that are not refugees, but they're vulnerable people groups.
Yeah.
Like in Nepal, we have a help with a home for trafficked women who have been rescued. In, we have a couple orphanages in Africa, stuff like that. But primarily, we're working in refugee spaces, but definitely orphans and widows and vulnerable women as well.
Yeah. Thank you for saying yes. I think that is such a encouragement to my heart, I'm sure to all the listeners, that you said yes. Like this was a a big step, and you kind of knew even from the beginning. You said yes, even if it was going to be a fail, that it wasn't going, you were
Yes.
still going to be helping people. Even if nothing grand was established, you still were going to be helping. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you for saying yes and emboldening us to
Yeah.
say yes to God's calling in our hearts as well.
Absolutely. I would say do it if you're even considering it, because no one will care if you fail except for you. Um, so it's
That's a
not
good
really
word.
that big of a deal. But honestly, I was very good in my, business background, HR operations, and I was top of my game and I knew what was going on. I'm almost a perfectionist in that. But to learn to let that go and just step out into areas where we can see God move has just been transforming in my own life. So I would say do it. If you're thinking about a ministry, if you're thinking about even a small thing that's on your block, like step out and do it, because it's amazing to see what doors the Lord opens when you
Mm.
really step out in faith in something that He's called you to do. So,
I love to just what you said. Like it could be like yours was really big, right? But not all of us would have that business background to
no,
be like, okay, let me make a 5-year plan. But
right.
but it could just be like your neighbors on your street. Like
Yes.
that could be the yes that you need to take. So I just really appreciate that encouragement as
Yeah.
well for
Sometimes the
us.
heroic thing is cheering your neighbor's kids on the soccer field. That can be very huge to single moms or parents who are struggling. So it's
Yeah.
all and. I mean, I chose refugees because we're in an area where they're all 3 hours from us. I don't know who's 3 hours from you. But so it
Yeah.
might seem big, but for us, these are our neighbors, That's who we're helping, our neighbors out here.
Such a good word. Thank you. I would love to jump into some stories. I know that God has obviously, He met you miraculously when you began the ministry.
Mhm.
Walk with Me Global has grown and thrived. God has met you along the way. I know that there have been probably a million and one
Yeah.
problems, headaches, things that are tripping you up as you're moving forward, but I know that God has shown up. So,
Mm.
can you just tell us a few of those stories? How has God's bold mercies really shown up, and how have you seen it active and alive in these as you care for the least of these?
I think personally in my own life, I've seen how God's transformed my heart when I've actually stepped out, even when I was afraid. So
Mm.
there have been times that I've been afraid to step on the plane. The first time to Iraq, in the middle of the Iraq War, I was
Ah,
scared. I had to will myself to step on the flight. But once I got there, we were going up to this remote area near the Iranian border, about 10 miles from Iran, 10 miles from Turkey. I mean, the bombers were still flying overhead. You could hear them. And I was doing an assessment of a women and children's camp there. And I sat with the women all day, and no men were allowed in this camp. So my 24-year-old driver dropped me off at the camp. I spent the day with this group, and we were laughing and sitting in the dirt and just talking about their life. And they were making fun of me, my bushy eyebrows and hairy arms and stuff like that. But at one point, one of the ladies, she looked at me and she said, "I know who you are." And I was taken aback. I didn't know really what she was saying. I'm like, who? Like, who am I? And she said, "You're one of them." And I'm like, I thought she was talking about UN or something. And she said, "You're one of the people of the book." And she said, "Ahl al Kitab." That's what they call us. Now, I've lived
Mhm.
in the Middle East for a long time.
Mm,
I've never heard anyone call us people of the book until this time.
mm,
And she
mhm.
said, "Will you tell us stories from the book?" I mean, out of the blue,
Wow.
I'm doing a medical assessment, but God has just opened this door for me to just
Wow.
share. And of course, then I'm on the spot and I'm like, what am I going to share? Like all these stories come to your mind and you're like, dear Jesus, help
You're
me. I
like,
got to figure it out.
yes.
And I just felt
Wow.
the Lord said to me in that moment, like, tell him the refugee stories. And I was like, I had never thought of the Bible in that light ever in my whole life. And then I just started to tell them about, Jesus at when he was under 2, and the king had declared that all of the children would need to be killed, and their parents had to flee. And we just started talking about them. And here I sit in the dirt with all their kids, and they have just fled the very same kind of fear, with the very same kind of fear. So it was amazing. That was probably one of the most amazing times to me, that God just opened doors for me that I didn't know were even going to happen. And
Yes.
I think another thing she said that really transformed the way we do our ministry and who we work with, when we were done with that day, that same lady said, "Hey, you need to tell your stories in the survivor camps." And I was like, I thought my word in Arabic wasn't right, because they're all survivors to me, right? So
Right,
I'm like, "What are
right.
you talking about? You're all survivors. What do you mean?" And she said, "No, no, there are entire camps that are just filled with girls who were captured by ISIS and abused by ISIS, and they have their own level of trauma, and they need to hear your stories." So
Wow.
for me, I was like, "What? Never even heard of that." I should have, but I didn't at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so we Google mapped the mountains of Iraq, and we found 3 survivor camps. And we have worked with those survivors for now many, many years. So that was
Wow.
incredible.
All right, give us like, okay, I can almost not picture you Google mapping and trying to find these survivor camps. So like
Yeah.
really put us there.
Yeah.
How in the world how did you do that? Tell us
So
exactly what that looked like.
it really looked like, hey, we know that the UN has, where the UN camps are, because those are
Okay.
pretty standard.
Those are like
So
well
we just
known then.
Yeah, yeah, the UN
Okay.
is well known. So we thought we would go near the UN camps and talk to them and find out how to get there. And that's exactly what we did. And then some of those were actual UN camps that we found. And they were like, "Can you help us, please? Like, we need help, because this is something we've never dealt with." These are locals running the UN camps in country. So that was it was quite traumatic. I mean, listen, I think one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life, and you might have been there actually when I came back from this trip from Iraq. I don't know,
Oh, yeah,
but
I think I
I
was.
I literally broke down in the sobbing cry, which, you guys don't know me, but that is not me. I'm the girl you put in charge when the building's burning down. I am not the girl that breaks out in the ugly cry, but after this trip to Iraq, I did that. But you can't hold a 10-year-old girl on your lap who's been sold in the city square and not be affected. You just cannot do it. So especially as a mom, and I am a mom of boys, but still, it makes no difference
Still.
when you've got kids who have been traumatized. That is rough. And so I think I penned one of my first blogs. It was called Tears in the Airport Lounge after that trip. And
Mhm.
it was just about meeting those young girls and really making a commitment to stick with this no matter what happens. Try to stick with them until they could get over their trauma. And so that's what we're doing.
Hmm. So what does your work look like? Instead of giving us the big picture, what does your work look like across the board? Let's look at like that 1 inch square. What does
Yeah.
your work look like in those, since you just told us the story of those survivor camps, what does your work look like in those survivor camps very
Yeah.
specifically?
So a lot of those survivor camps actually have been disbanded now, and the people have gone back to their villages. So our work really is not in those major camps, but we have centers in areas like, especially in Lebanon right now, is our biggest one for trauma, for these traumatized girls.
Okay.
So
Okay.
essentially, for me as a businesswoman and trying to set up our programs, it means I get there, I get on the ground, I try to figure out how I can network and pull in all our counselors who might be able to come in and do some counseling, which we've done. We've built pilot programs where we've put these girls through PTSDs, all their screenings, and then figured out how to do programs for them that are very specific. So we've done those. Another thing that we did is really this is I've never really met a girl in from those places who wasn't in some way brutally sexually assaulted, or had at least seen that in her time fleeing from war. So we realized that this problem was way bigger than anything we could handle. And so what we tried to do is get Syrian moms to go back to school. So we ended up getting 100 Syrian moms enrolled in a university setting where they could go through a whole trauma program, and they all graduated. so they could help their own communities. So for us, it's really about empowering local leaders so they can give back to their communities. And what we've seen from that has been amazing, especially because now we're at the point where we can measure. But the average
Yeah.
age for some of our girls for marriage and stuff like that, because they just overcome trauma, they become more productive. We give them a vocational skill or a trade. And the average marriage age has gone from 13 to 18, which is just in five
Wow.
years, staggering. So I'm proud of
In
that.
5
That's
years, it's
really, really,
increased
really,
5 years. Yes, that's
yes, that's
huge.
amazing. And that's just our little demographic. And we're just doing our little piece, our little part, and trying to figure it out. And I think it's like most moms, we're like, we want to be problem solvers. Let's help these kids. How do we do it? Let's network. Let's ask our friends. And that's really what we're doing.
Wow.
And people are
Wow.
stepping up, which is amazing.
They're saying they're giving their yes also
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. We just built a brand new trauma program for all the Ukrainian pastors and lay leaders because they were asking, how do we deal with these people that are so traumatized and affected by the war that are coming through their churches in Western Ukraine? And so we're just rolling that out now, and it looks completely different. So super cool. But
Yeah. Especially I think if you're just drawing off of local leaders, it's going to look
yes,
different in every pocket, right? There can be
it
no one
looks
size
different.
fits all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it has to be what they're passionate about and what they're into. And so getting behind that and really empowering them or providing training, providing funds and resources to make it happen has just been incredible. Because, when COVID happened and we were all shut down, I take
Yeah.
about 20 teams a year, before COVID. Um, and those are medical or dental or teaching teams, all kinds of counseling teams. When COVID hit, all of our programs ran with all of our local leaders, even
Wow.
though none of us could go in and travel. So I think that was just God in the very beginning giving us the strategy to set up with refugees just because we met him in the clinic right off the bat and we're like, oh, hey, here we go, you know?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden they had to do all the work as well, which was probably
Yes.
hard for them as
Yeah.
well because they couldn't rely on extra hands and extra sets of hands. But on the other side of the coin, I'm sure they found it very empowering as well.
Yeah. Well, they were already running all of our programs, and that's the beauty
Yeah.
of the demographic of refugees that we've really been working with. They are very educated, many of them more educated than we are. So, one of our first refugees that we helped was a multimillionaire. He owned all the steel factories in Iraq, like multimillionaire, and then he's living in squalor as a refugee. So I think giving the micro loan of $1,000 to help them set up a business was not a very big risk for someone who was running millions and millions of dollars through their business. And that
Yeah.
was super successful in the beginning. He turned that into a business that could feed his family every single month just by a small micro loan. And we helped him set up and get kind of organized, but
Yeah. Of
amazing.
course.
So we didn't have to do a lot. We have to do a little piece, and they've been able to do it. It's amazing.
Oh, that's so amazing. What is something that has surprised you about working with refugees that you didn't know when you set off originally in 2014, 2015?
I think one of the most surprising things to me was I thought all refugees were like registered UN, like someone was helping them. And really, who we're helping, 90% of who we're helping are the undocumented who fled during the war, who were not actually registered with the UN and have no outside source of support or help. And I didn't know there were that many. Like I knew there were some,
Yeah,
but I mean, it is millions, millions, literally, of
I
refugees who
had
are
no
really
idea.
undocumented. Yeah, and they're living in shanties and tents that are made of like bed sheets and plastic, in the middle of open fields. And so that shocked me. But the other thing that shocks me even more today that I've been now working since 2015 in this 7 years. Um, the average stay of a refugee in the countries where we work is 15 years. Like
Hmm.
these are people who fled thinking they might be gone a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then they would get to return home. And now they're 15 years. And that's the average. And those who fled Syria, we're hitting year 11, I think now, maybe 12, if I did the count. But that's crazy to me. I didn't realize that a refugee would stay that long in a country. So those are shocking things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have um any refugees that you're working with who turn around and then become like national leaders with the refugees? You know what I mean? They're like coming in as refugees and then turn. Do you have any stories like that of people who are doing that, who have done that?
I think that's all of our leaders, because a doctor who comes in as a refugee and then we empower him by building his clinic or giving him his license, and he in turn serves his whole refugee community. That's it. That's an incredible leader, and that's what they're all doing. We have teachers, we have
Wow.
dentists, we have doctors. Like, it's incredible to just watch how they rise to the occasion and become leaders within their small, refugee areas. Um, to be
Hmm.
honest, a lot of those refugees stay with us 2 or 3 years, and then they get refugee status somewhere else, Canada or Australia. So we've said goodbye to a lot of our doctors and our
Yeah.
nurses and our pharmacists and our teachers, but but it's just incredible to see that, even when they have to start over in another country, and these doctors have to start over in another country, they do it and they rebuild their lives. And I think just watching that success and being part of their journey has been super cool. I love it.
Wow. I actually didn't realize that. Like that actually, of course, right? Refugees will from especially in war-torn countries, refugees are going to be anybody from, whether they're business leaders, millionaires to doctors, dentists, I mean, the whole thing. And so when I asked you that question, I kind of was picturing maybe like a younger poor boy come
No.
in and then start serving, but like you have doctors that are
Yeah.
fleed, let's say Syria or Iraq, and
Yeah.
then they're turning around and actually able to use their skill and serve as
And
well. That surprises me.
yeah,
I
and
think it's
so
awesome.
they step up, and we have no language or cultural barriers. Like, it's just super easy. The hardest part is just transitioning and trying to help them make a living, because technically in a lot of these countries, refugees can't work, so we can't pay them a salary. So we pay a stipend that helps pay for their housing and their food. We try to help in these ways that we can, within the legal framework. So that's been more of a challenge, I think, for us. How do we help
Yeah.
this doctor from Iraq? Really, he can't volunteer 40 hours a week. He has to feed his family, and how do we help him do that? So figuring out those small pieces have been quite challenging, but the other part, just watching them serve, is amazing. And they want to step up, because the number one thing they all say is, we can't just sit around. Like, it's not healthy for our family. We can't just sit here in this tent with nothing. Because they were all, I mean, not all, but most of them were upstanding community citizens, um, working farmers, teachers, lawyers, architects. We have all of them working for us.
Yeah.
So that has surprised me and been a, just incredible blessing for us in our ministry, to be able to work so many places. I think that's why, because we don't have to find leaders, they're already there.
Mm.
We just have to
Mm.
empower them.
You just have to empower them and support them. It's
Yes.
almost like you're like creating new little like cities
Yes.
almost
Yes.
where
It's
they've
true,
come from.
because in most places, we build a full community center. So on the community center site, we'll have the medical clinic, the school, all the education, vocational training, and it becomes a community hub where, they've just lost everything in their community back home. And this kind of becomes a safe place where then they can all gather and meet with their people and their, same background, with the people from their same background. So that has just been really healing for them in a lot of ways as well, to rebuild community in a new place, especially since they're, going to be there for a very long time.
Hmm. You talked about the impact of the one lady that was in the and now all of a sudden I'm blanking, but I think she was in a Syrian. Was she from Syria? That one lady that was like that you're a person of the book or a woman of the book.
No, she was Iraqi. She was
Okay,
from
from
Iraq.
Iraq. Okay,
Yeah.
so you told that story. Any other really impactful stories that are going to just stick with you the rest of your life as you've been working with these refugees?
Wow, wow, so many.
Oh, I'm sure.
So many. I think I'll just take one from this year, that has just been phenomenal to me. We're not really important people. We live here in Qatar. My husband teaches, and And we don't really have any network in Ukraine or across Poland. In Europe, we've never done anything in Europe. So
Mm.
when this Ukraine crisis happened, my husband had been teaching one of the Polish ambassador to drive in the sand dunes out here. So I called him and said, "Hey, can you set up a meeting?" And immediately we had meetings with the Polish ambassador, Ukrainian ambassador, and went on into Poland and Moldova and all those places around Ukraine before we actually went into Ukraine. But I think the most amazing thing to me is just to watch what God does when we step out in faith. A little bit like that first plane ride to Iraq. Because I got on the plane to Poland. I wasn't scared to go there. Got on the plane to Poland, but I didn't know anyone. I didn't know what we were going to do or how we are going to help or how that works in Europe. But I am literally 2 minutes off the flight, just stepping into my hotel room, and I get a call from someone in Canada. "Hey, you need to meet Father Merrick." And I'm like, I don't know who that is. But anyway, he was
Wow.
he came to the hotel right away and met with me. And he was one of the heads of 280 churches across Poland that said, "We want to help. And we want to set
Wow.
up our churches to help refugees." So immediately when we were on the border that week, and just, I know you saw this in the news, just thousands flooding over the border, we had hundreds of churches already that had taken their entire sanctuaries and turned them into hostels. They had, beds everywhere. Their
Mm.
foyers had washing machines and dryers. I mean, they just literally transformed their churches. And so that happened not only in Poland, but then they connected us in Ukraine and in Moldova. So really we're working with about 1,000 churches across that region right now. And for me, it has just been just like, wow, like, yay, God, like the church is stepping up and they are
Mm.
really playing a major part to help people in the middle of this crisis. So that's been moving for me. And we have called our work in Ukraine the corridor of hope, because we have the ability to bring hope because we have Jesus. And it's amazing
Amen.
to
Mm.
see when those doors and those avenues open. And especially for me, I'm like, we didn't know any churches. Now we're working with almost 1,000. So just
Wow.
incredible, incredible miracle, that God can
Mm.
do that. It's even hard for me to
Amen.
believe.
It's so awesome hearing your stories and you're just going in, I think about it in Jordan, you have a few connections, but you're landing in a foreign country,
No.
which of course you
Yeah.
live overseas, so you're a little bit more comfortable, but it is you had to will yourself to get on a plane to Iraq.
Yeah.
You don't have these massive connections. You're not going in
No.
with full day of meetings, you know what I mean? But God
Yeah.
just provides the people that He wants you to meet. And He is so sovereign in that way. And I just am so blessed to hear that. I'm thinking as you're talking to me, I'm thinking man, the Melissa of today is not the Melissa 7 years ago. I'm sure that
No.
working with refugees and the work that God has done, that he's also done a great work in your life also. How has working with refugees really impact your heart personally?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the main things that always comes to my mind, it's in the Psalms. You probably can find it and quote it, but it just says that the Lord is near the brokenhearted, and He saves those who are crushed in spirit. And I think just seeing that that is the case, that God is there and He is able. And just, I think in the beginning for me, it was really tough. And I shed a lot of tears when I would get home or I get on the flight or get in the airport lounge. I might write a book someday called Tears in the Airport Lounge because I've done it so much. But in those early years, it was really tough because you're hearing just these terrible refugee stories. But I think now I'm 7 years in, I'm like, those stories are still sad. We're still hearing them. But I have a different kind of faith and a different kind of hope because I've seen the 7 year journey of the people that we've seen come out of that mess and what God has done to transform their lives. And so I have a different kind of hope. It's not just a hope, maybe it's a hope like, yes, God can do it. And I know that He can do it. And I think that for me, just understanding that has just changed my life. Yeah, we might be in the middle of a mess. We might be going through a very difficult time, but God is right there in the middle of our mess, and He is able and more than willing to meet us there if we are crushed in spirit. So I think just understanding that and walking through difficult things in my own life, that has really, really helped me.
It just has this like picture in my mind. It's like this hope that was maybe a little bit like you had hope at the beginning, right? But maybe it was a
Yeah.
little bit squishy. And
Yeah.
now it's like your hope is built just upon this firm rock that God
Yeah.
will show up, he'll provide, and he'll provide grace, peace,
Yes.
comfort, all that you need in those moments. So
Yeah.
so powerful. I would love to ask you, as someone that has really poured your life and heart into working with the least of these around now, really in not just the Middle East, but in many pockets of the world, what is some advice that you have for the American church regarding refugee work or regarding refugees?
Well, I think just as I pointed out, we all have the ability to give hope, and we cannot lose sight of that. And I think just don't be weary in doing good, because there is so much that we have yet to do. And that's something, I think that we can share with any church or any believer. We don't have to be great. Like, I don't have to know everything. I just have to do my small part. And sometimes that's going, sometimes that's giving, sometimes that's praying, but it's using our skill and using what we have, what resources we have, no matter where we are, to do our part. And so that's what I say. And don't grow weary in that, because it is super important. Like for my organization, we are grassroots. We fund our projects by people who come and catch a vision and help support those projects. We do not have large scale support anywhere. But just watching how God uses, an engineer who might come and help us build up our floodplain so our center doesn't flood, or a teacher who comes, or a hairdresser who comes to our cosmetology school and teaches the refugee girls a skill. Just watching people use what they have. It's not about big money. It's not about big things. It's about doing small steps. I have a mantra in our organization, because when we first started, I believed it, but now it's like a driving part of my daily life. And we say small steps change lives. And that's exactly what we do. We just do a series of small steps every day to help those in front of us.
Hmm. Wow, I love that. What an encouragement. Thank you so much for those words. You have been an inspiration. I think also listening to your stories, we realize too that these refugees are as much of an inspiration also.
Yes.
So we thank you so much for sharing these stories with us and being their voice as well. And thank you for saying yes to what God had just kind of the small little drop of calling that he placed on your heart, for saying yes to that. So, in closing, I would love to ask, as I ask all my guests,
Okay.
outside of God and his word, because we know those things make you happy, what is
Yeah.
one thing making you happy right now?
Wow. Um, I just came back from Prague. And okay, Prague is amazing. I've been there before, but I think the thing that blessed me the most is I got to go there in the fall. Like, I miss the fall so much. Like, I'm from the great Northwest, and that beautiful, I miss the beauty of fall. And I've only been home once in 26 years in the fall. So being in Prague this last week, just in fall leaves everywhere, was just incredible, made me happy.
So happy. I get that. Like, I feel that right there that
Yeah.
we are living in our first fall in many years,
Yeah.
and I am loving it. And I remember my first fall in Jordan when and we had lived in the north, not too far northeast, but like Maryland area for a short time and enjoyed the fall there. We moved to Jordan that first fall. My mom collected fall leaves like red and orange and yellow. She sent
Mhm.
them so the kids can do that craft where they press them, but with,
Yeah.
shavings of crayon. When I opened that Ziploc bag with those fall leaves, it smelled like fall. And I
Oh,
was
yeah.
so ridiculously happy. I was like, the kids and I, we just kept smelling it, because you really
Yeah.
do miss that. If you have lived
Yeah.
without one, especially where you were born and raised, it's a
Yeah.
beautiful fall. So I get that. I'm really glad that you got to enjoy that
Me too. Me too.
in Prague. That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So glad that you were just willing to share your story. And thank you very much for joining us.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, don't go anywhere. I'm just going to stop